Last year, the budget the President proposed ignored the spending caps that were then in place. As a result, it offered unrealistic expectations and created a challenge for agencies and departments to identify true needs. We need to start this discussion for fiscal year 2017 budget on no better footing with a budget that seemingly abides by the bipartisan spending caps set forth in October, but full of gimmicks. Unfortunately, the President's budget has shifted billions of dollars from discretionary programs to mandatory side of the ledger. This allows the administration to circumvent the budget constraints while touting the support for key investments. It again offers unrealistic expectations about what we can afford. On the Interior Subcommittee, we must balance a wealth of important issues: Indian health care, education, fighting wildfires, management of lands and resources, protection of human health and environment. Whether challenges arise from natural disasters, man-made disasters, health crisis, rising debt, we need to be strategic and have well-defined plans for tackling the problems before us. Simply throwing money at problems has rarely resolved such issues. It's our job to identify common sense, long-term solutions and to prioritize all these issues without adding to our $19 trillion debt. Mandatory spending continues to rise faster than any portion of the federal budget, something that they're discussing at this very moment. Therefore, a budget that proposes more mandatory spending is woefully out of touch. In an effort to rebalance expectations, I'd like to explain where we actually are. Under the current budget agreement, non-defense discretionary spending for fiscal year 2017 has increased by $40 million government-wide. That's $40 million over the entire discretionary government. Meanwhile, EPA's proposed budget requests $127 million more than last year. That number excludes another $300 million proposed outside of the discretionary caps. Within the budget, the agency is proposing to work on more regulations while proposing cuts for water infrastructure and Great Lakes funding. The budget proposes more funding to implement regulations the courts have put on hold. Meanwhile, the budget again proposes deep cuts to the diesel emission reduction grants, despite the fact that only 30% of the trucks and other heavy-duty vehicles that have transitioned to cleaner technologies. We need to follow the science and increase discretionary funding for DERA program to accelerate the replacement of older engines with newer, cleaner engines that actually show progress. With so much left to do, we're not prepared to cut discretionary funding for DERA program by 80%, nor eliminate funding for radon grants, with 21,000 lung cancer deaths per year are directly attributable to exposure to radon. I hope today's discussion you can help the committee understand why the administration does not place a higher priority on the radon exposure issue, given these startling statistics. Turning to policy, it's unavoidably clear the administration is intent on making select forms of energy uneconomical or even obsolete. We've seen this play out in Chairman Rogers' district for the last 7 years, certainly Mr. Jenkins' district, via refusal to approve permits to operate. The policy continues to spread as the administration imposes a moratorium on operations on public lands, designates new monuments, precludes offshore energy development in the Atlantic and Arctic, adds cost to existing operations via EPA, ozone, methane, and water regulations. And the White House, with one foot out the door, has promised to double down on anti-jobs agenda driven by a desire to keep it in the ground as the clock runs out on this administration. In the meantime, statutory obligations are put on hold or given insufficient attention. It's time for a new perspective. You've got a tough job, Administrator McCarthy. We all want clean air, clean water, and a strong, robust economy. It's not a Republican or Democratic issue. I know that's something we have often said. We both want a healthy environment and job creation, and we need a real debate regarding the best way to incentivize those outcomes rather than a rewrite of regulations. But it starts by proposing and operating within a budget that lives within our means. The people I represent in California have to live on a budget that reflects what they can afford, and so too does the federal government. I know all members are interested in discussing various issues with you today, so I'll save my additional remarks for the period following your testimony. I'm pleased to yield to my friend and our distinguished ranking member, Ms. McCullough.
Thank you. Thank you for your words of solidarity with the people in Belgium this morning. Terrible conversations parents are having with their children again as they find themselves under siege. So thank you for recognizing that tragedy, and we do need to stand together. I would like to join Chairman Calvert in welcoming Administrator McCarthy to the subcommittee. The Environmental Protection Agency was created to protect human health, the health of our environment, and to ensure clean air and clean water is there for our families and children. In the 1970s, when communities across this nation saw the effects of mass pollution on the rivers and in the skies, the EPA was a bipartisan solution to address this public health crisis. It was an idea I remember how excited both my Republican mother and Democratic father were that the federal government was working together. Because of the success of the EPA, today we often take for granted the quality of the water we drink from our taps and the air that we breathe. This year, however, the critical need for the EPA once again was unmistakable. Our nation watched a tragedy unfold in Flint, Michigan, where children were poisoned by the lead in their drinking water. The residents of Flint were betrayed by their state government, and to this day still do not have safe drinking water available for their taps. The scandal shines a bright light on why it's necessary to have federal protections for our environment, our water, and our public health. Critics often argue that states are the best able to regulate themselves, but Flint shows us that the federal government, working with states, has a role to play in protecting those communities. And we here in Congress need to look at the underlying law to ensure that the EPA can step in when a state is ignoring the public health of its residents, the United States of America's citizens. Parents should be able to trust that their children are not being poisoned at school, at their places of worship, and especially in their own homes. While the situation in Flint is unique because it was created by a state's failure to implement protections for its residents, the issue of aging water infrastructure and lead pipes is pervasive all across this country. And it's time for us to have a serious discussion about infrastructure. It's unconscionable that in America, the richest country in the world, there are children whose physical and cognitive development is being harmed because they lack access to clean drinking water, which is a basic human right. Now, turning to the budget request, the President's fiscal year 2017 budget request includes $8.27 billion for the EPA. That amount is $127 million above fiscal year 2016 enacted level. The request includes increases for core programs, targeting resources towards those programs that matter most to public health and our environment. Unfortunately, I don't think the budget goes far enough. The budget requests an additional $77 million for grants to support states and tribes so they can implement their environmental programs. However, this increase would not even bring the grants back to 2012 levels. Furthermore, we all realize the nation's water infrastructure is in crisis. Yet, sadly, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which is a major funding source for municipal water infrastructure projects, is slashed by $414 million. I also must express my disappointment once again that the administration is proposing to cut $50 million from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative has made measurable strides in protecting and restoring the Great Lakes ecosystem, but much work needs to be done. With the great unmet demand for both water infrastructure and restoration projects, I have to wonder if these cuts were proposed not on their merits, but because the agency was trying to fulfill requests for other increases within their already terribly strained budget. The SRF and the GLRI programs are among few in EPA that have strong bipartisan support. So I will be working with Chairman Calvert to restore these cuts. I only wish we could have the same kind of bipartisan support, though, to restore the cuts that the agency core operations have faced. For 5 years, the EPA has been under attack and its budget's been slashed. Opponents of the EPA view this as a victory, but the crisis in Flint, Michigan shows what they really were: irresponsible cuts that jeopardize the EPA's ability to provide state oversight and protect public health. I truly hope that something positive can come from this tragedy, and that it will inspire both sides of the aisle to come together, as we did in the creation of the EPA, and ensure proper funding for environmental regulations and for infrastructure, so that no mother or father has to worry that the water that they are giving their baby is poisonous. Administrator McCarthy, I really do appreciate the work that you and all the employees at the EPA do, and I look forward to your testimony. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I learned something new every day. Was it your mom a Republican?
You betcha.
Okay, I know. She voted for Richard Nixon.
She did. My father didn't.
Yeah. Well, 1 out of 2 is not bad. I know Sherman Rogers would have loved to have been here this morning, but we have a conference going on right now, and he has to be there. So I'd like to submit his full opening statement for the record without objection. But the ranking member is here this morning, Ms. Lowy, and I'm happy to recognize her, and her grandson's in attendance, so we're very proud of that. So, Ms. Lowy, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To be here today, and I want to thank Ranking Member McCullum for your hard work on this committee as well. And I'd like to welcome Administrator McCarthy back before the subcommittee today. And before I share my remarks, I too, Mr. Chairman, want to express our heartfelt prayers for all the families who lost loved ones in another evil act of terrorism, and express our determination to bring the perpetrators to justice. Thank you. The Environmental Protection Agency is tasked with ensuring that our nation's air and water is safe. I know my constituents are grateful for your agency's work to clean up the Hudson River and the Long Island Sound, especially given the economic significance of those bodies of water to our region and the nation as a whole. The EPA has done good work under your leadership on lowering carbon emissions and helping the United States do its part in the global fight against climate change. Today, I want to talk about an issue that is of great concern, and that is the Flint water crisis. It is a public health emergency. 8,000 children under the age of 6 could have been exposed to lead contamination. The long-term ramifications of that exposure are severe and will not end when the water is clean. Decades or even a lifetime of difficulty may plague those affected. As ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee, I want to make it clear that I am absolutely committed to making sure that the federal government supports the people of Flint and the federal government holds up our end of the bargain. I'd like to hear from you what went wrong in Flint and what the EPA will do in both the short term and the long term to prevent another crisis like this happening on our watch. We must also ensure that the EPA has the resources to carry out your mission. You come before us today with a budget request of nearly $8.27 billion, an increase of $127 million above current funding. This increase is badly needed. At a time when we face the glaring threat of climate change, when the public health and quality of the air and water are at risk, EPA funding, my colleagues, is nearly 20% below its fiscal year 2010 level. Below. Despite high demand, I am concerned that a tax on EPA funding will continue to restrict its ability to get the job done. I hope that this committee can move beyond politics, look at the science, provide an increase for the EPA so it can adequately protect our public health. I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think it's a point well made that, excuse me. Oh, I should get to your first to your opening statement, then I'll make my comments. You're recognized, Ms. McCarthy.
Thank you, Chairman Calvert. Ranking Member McCollum, Ranking Member Lowy, it's great to be here, and I appreciate the members of the subcommittee giving me time today. I would like to just briefly discuss EPA's proposed fiscal year 2017 budget. I am joined by the agency's Deputy Chief Financial Officer, David Bloom. EPA's budget request of $8.267 billion for the 2017 fiscal year lays out a strategy to ensure some steady progress in addressing environmental issues that are crucial to public health. For 45 years, our investments to protect public health and the environment have consistently paid off many times over. We've cut air pollution by 70%, and we've cleaned up half of the nation's polluted waterways. All the while, our national economy has tripled. Effective environmental protection is a joint effort. It's a joint effort of EPA, the states, as well as our tribal partners. That's why the largest portion of our budget, $3.28 billion, or almost 40%, is provided directly to our state and our tribal partners. In fiscal year 2017, we're requesting an increase of $77 million in funding for state and tribal assistance categorical grants and in support of critical state work in air and water protection, as well as continued support for our tribal partners. This budget request also reinforces EPA's focus on community support by providing targeted funding and support for regional coordinators to help communities find and determine the best programs to address their local environmental priorities. The budget includes $90 million in brownfields project grants to local communities. That's an increase of $10 million, which will help to return contaminated sites to productive reuse. This budget prioritizes actions to reduce the impacts of climate change and supports President Obama's Climate Action Plan. It includes $235 million for efforts to cut carbon pollution and other greenhouse gases through common sense standards, guidelines, as well as voluntary programs. The EPA's Clean Power Plan continues to be a top priority for the EPA and for our nation's inevitable transition to a clean energy economy. Though the Supreme Court has temporarily stayed the Clean Power Plan rule, states are not precluded from voluntarily choosing to continue implementation planning. EPA will continue to assist those states that voluntarily decide to do so. As part of the President's 21st Century Clean Transportation Plan, the budget also proposes to establish a new mandatory fund at the EPA, providing $1.65 billion over the course of 10 years to retrofit, replace, or repower diesel equipment, and up to $300 million in fiscal year 2017 to renew and increase funding for the successful diesel emission reduction grant program. The budget also includes $4.2 million increase to vehicle engine and fuel compliance programs, including critical testing capabilities. We also have to confront the systemic challenges that threaten the country's drinking water and the infrastructure that delivers it. This budget includes a $2 billion request for the state revolving fund and $42 million in additional funds to provide direct technical assistance to small communities, loan financing to promote public-private collaboration, and training to increase the capacity of communities and states to plan and finance drinking water and wastewater infrastructure improvements. The EPA requests $20 million to fund the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act program, which will provide direct financing for the construction of water and wastewater infrastructure by making loans for large, innovative projects of regional and national significance. This budget also provides $22 million in funding to expand the technical, managerial, and financial capabilities of drinking water systems. Included is $7.1 million for Water Infrastructure and Resiliency Finance Center and the Center for Environmental Finance that will enable communities across the country to focus on financial planning for upcoming public infrastructure investments, to expand the work with states to identify financing opportunities for rural communities, and enhance partnership collaboration with the United States Department of Agriculture. EPA is also seeking a $20 million increase in the Superfund remedial program, which will accelerate the pace of cleanups, supporting states, local communities, and tribes in their effort to assess and clean up sites and return them to productive reuse. EPA's fiscal year 2017 budget request will let us continue to make a real and visible difference to communities and public health every day, and provide us with a foundation to revitalize the economy and improve infrastructure across the country. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Let's try this again. A point was made about the bipartisan effort, and I think that's true about the environment over the years. Obviously, EPA was signed into law by Republican President Richard Nixon. In my own home state, California, Cal EPA was signed into law by Ronald Reagan. And quite frankly, we also created the South Coast Air Quality Basin. Our former colleague, Jerry Lewis, wrote that legislation back when he was in the state assembly, and of course was signed into law by then Governor Ronald Reagan. Now, the Inland Empire where I live, it's part of the South Coast Air Quality Basin and has been in a non-attainment for ozone about as long as the federal standard for ozone has existed. But as I'm sure you know, it's not for a lack of trying. The South Coast Air Basin has a long history of implementing some of the most stringent air pollution measures in the country. We broke ground in many of these instances. When I played football, I could remember my early days. I could not see the goalposts on the other side of the field because the air quality was so bad. Today, that has totally changed, and yet the population has tripled in my area in Southern California. Nearby, we have two of the busiest ports in the United States, the Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Long Beach, which are responsible for 40% of all U.S. container imports and exports. These containers are loaded into trucks. They travel through my district and the rest of the country, so mobile sources contribute to about 80% of the air pollution in the South Coast. We've made significant progress improving air quality, however, as I mentioned, largely due to topography and large volume of transportation occurs in and around the Inland Empire. We need some additional resources to make improvements. That's why in the FY 2015 Omnibus, renewed our targeted airshed grant program to provide additional resources to areas across the nation are similarly struggling to meet air quality standards and need additional help. The 16 Omnibus built on that by doubling those grants. With EPA's latest ozone standard of 70 parts per billion, the South Coast Air Quality Basin will invariably remain out of compliance. It also may cause other counties to fall out of attainment with air quality standards. Unfortunately, I'm struggling to understand why this budget, with all these increases elsewhere, cuts discretionary funding for DERA by 80% and also proposes to eliminate the targeted airshed grant program. These programs help communities work toward the 2008 ozone mandates. Meanwhile, the budget proposes a $50 million increase for the Clean Power Plan, which, as you know, the courts have put on hold. Can you explain that, Ms. McCarthy?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question, and I would congratulate the South Coast for all of the work that it has done, and the work that it has done that's improved air quality tremendously, and we'll keep working with them as we have in the past. I think the challenge we have for DERA, and we have, as you indicate, offered a request for $10 million in that account. Both you and I understand how valuable that program is. One of the reasons why the President has looked for a mandatory effort to continue to fund DERA at a much more significant level is because of that. We know that this program has had great impact. We're going to continue to support it as best we can, but there is an opportunity that the President has offered to have that be done in a different way outside of EPA's budget, and we'd be supporting that effort tremendously.
It's one of the few times that Senator Feinstein, Senator Boxer, and I agree on anything is the DERA program, which has been remarkable in its ability to improve, especially particulate pollution in the South Coast Basin, fine particulate pollution. So I would hope that we could, as you know, we're not going to be getting into mandatory spending realistically. That's not going to happen. So we're going to have to find money within the discretionary budget to do that. With that, Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would defer to my ranking member of full appropriations for any questions she might have first.
You're very kind, since there are about 10 hearings. Thank you very much for your consideration. This is busy appropriations hearing. I think we have about 8 hearings today, so I welcome you again. However, I am outraged, as are many of my colleagues, at the neglect and criminal incompetence that resulted in the Flint water crisis. It's imperative that the federal government hold up our end of the bargain to end the crisis and help the community heal. EPA, as I understand it, is currently on the ground in Flint, assisting with the emergency response, providing technical assistance. This work is essential to making the city water supply safe. This is an emergency, and as a result, EPA could not plan or budget for the costs associated with this work. Can you share with us how much do you estimate EPA will have spent or will continue to spend on Flint this year?
Well, Ranking Member, as you know, EPA is committed, and we are there in full force in Flint, and we're going to be there until that water is once again stabilized and it can be consumed by people with confidence. So I can't estimate exactly what the costs are. We know that we have already identified the need for millions of dollars of our current budget to be dedicated there. We'll keep at it, and we'll find a way to continue to meet our obligations there. But as you indicate, it is a long-term strategy. That's why the federal government is there in full force, not just EPA. So we'll be working on the water quality, but we have Health and Human Services running a federal emergency response there that's going to look at some of those longer-term challenges.
What I am looking at now is what is needed in addition to what you've already budgeted. And it would seem to me, in order to respond appropriately and adequately, you would have to take those resources from other programs and further weaken EPA's ability to protect public health. Mr. Chairman, I do hope we can act quickly to pass an emergency supplemental to address not only the Flint crisis, but also Zika and opioid crises. EPA has received a lot of criticism for not updating its lead and copper rules quickly enough. In fact, it's been an amazing about-face from my colleagues across the aisle who spent years filling appropriations bills with policy riders to block the EPA from regulating, and now there's unanimity in admonishing EPA for not regulating enough. Frankly, protecting children from lead should not be a partisan issue. If you could share with us, how does EPA's lead renovation, repair, and painting rule protect children from exposure to lead? And frankly, I remember years ago, even when 30 years ago, working at the state level, dealing with the issue of paint with lead in it. We were so concerned. Could you share with us your program?
Well, there's two ways in which you're responding to this, Ranking Member. One is, as you indicated, we're taking a look at lead exposure from water. So we're looking at our lead and copper rule. But I want everybody to understand that the challenges we faced in Flint were actually a lack of complying with the current rule. And that is essential for us to make sure that everybody is implementing the current rule while we look at the next one. In terms of lead paint, that is a significant exposure route for lead in our kids, as well as lead in soil. And we're working on all of those issues. The way that the rule works is to require that when we have homes that are of a certain age, you have to look and see whether or not, and test whether or not you have lead paint. And if you do, you have to use certain work practice standards to ensure that there is a sealing of the area where you're working on that lead paint, and that it's removed appropriately, and it doesn't provide a route of exposure for the family moving forward. The challenges for that rule is that, in moving that forward, it requires every state to pay attention. It requires training to be done. It requires certification. For the most part, what we're seeing is that when you have an older home, they're going ahead and using those work practice standards as opposed to relying on the test, because the test, as you know, continues to be a challenge for us. So we are going to continue to move that forward, but it will take a concerted effort. And frankly, we're not moving in the pace that certainly all of us would be comfortable with in terms of getting lead paint out of kids' homes and getting it out of the soil, never mind the challenges we're facing in water.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you recall, rider, and I offered an amendment to strike the rider that would have prohibited the EPA from implementing the lead renovation, repair, and painting rule. While, frankly, my amendment did not pass in this committee, the ranking member and I were able to remove it from the final omnibus spending bill. And I hate to think, I don't think I have any time, but at some point you can let us know, had that rider been implemented, how it would have weakened EPA's tools for protecting children from lead exposure. It would be very helpful if you can respond to that in writing, so I can graciously thank the chairman for your time.
Happy to do that, Ranking Member.
Thank you, gentlelady. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back to the committee. It's always an exciting time in our committee when the EPA comes here. As you can tell, there's sometimes differences between Republicans and Democrats, and sometimes an agreement between Republicans and Democrats on such things in the Pacific Northwest as fish consumption and a few things like that. And I will have some questions that I will submit for the record on fish consumption and where we are on the arsenic rule and the difficulty of small communities complying with the 10 parts per billion down from 50,
I appreciate that,
what
sir.
sort of assistance might be available to some of these very small communities that essentially can't do it. But I want to ask something else. I watched with some interest the hearing last week with the Government Oversight Committee, with you and the Governor Snyder of Michigan, and quite frankly, I was dismayed. There is a lot of finger pointing going on, a lot of finger pointing going to be going on for quite some time. Hell, they'll write books about this in the future, about what happened and what didn't happen and who did what and whatever. The problem is that doesn't solve the problem.
That's right.
And what we need to do is solve the problem. And what I want to know from you is, what should City of Flint, State of Michigan, and the federal government, us, be doing to address this problem in Flint? And then what are the lessons learned from this moving on? As I understand, there are as many as 2,000 communities out there that might be facing the same type of situation. And if in that answer you could tell me, because I don't know that people have the solid background on what the demand is out there in water and sewer systems in this country. And
Yeah.
do you know what the total backlog of maintenance of water and sewer systems is in the country, and how much the feds and along with state and local communities spend trying to address that backlog each year? Because at the rate we're going, it's going to take 100 years to address the backlog that exists today, pretty much. So anyway, I'll turn it over to you to.
Well, Congressman, thank you for talking about what went wrong and what we need to do about it. And I think everybody needs to be accountable for this, including the Environmental Protection Agency, in terms of how we responded to it. So, but getting to the crux of the matter, Flint was a fairly unique situation. So while we are actively, and I've written to every governor and every primacy agency, and I have all of my regions working with the many 68,000 systems that actually are regulated under the lead and copper rule, to take a look at where they are in their process. How do we get more transparent? If people have lost faith in government, let's put the information out. Make sure they're following protocols. Map where those lead lines are. Let's really get more serious about this and more transparent. And so we're working, hand in hand with those states and those cities that continue to have challenges. It's not an easy easy issue, and it's going to take a while, and we have 10 million lead lines out there. So it's a challenge to just make sure that the water is properly treated, but it's also, over time, getting at those lead lines is going to be essential. And so we're working also on updating the lead and copper rule, making sure we're implementing, but also strengthening that rule. But we are looking at a significant challenge in terms of water infrastructure, as you noted. And it's important for us to not just look at lead, but at the system itself, because if you look at Flint, that was part of the challenge as well. It's twice as big as it needs to be because of disinvestment in that community. And it hasn't been invested in decades. And so you have a system problem that is essential to correct, which is why I think it's going to take a while before Flint is back in action. We'll get the system stabilized for corrosion control, but beyond that, there's much work to be done. And across the U.S., we took a look at this in 2011 and 2012, and we estimated that the backlog of need for drinking water up through 2030 was something in the order of 300 and some odd $1 billion. I don't have the exact figure in my head. But I think that's a low ball estimate now. I've heard others upwards of estimating $600 billion.
And that's
What
just
we're
water
doing-
systems.
This is for drinking water. Drinking water. And so we have a real challenge here. We also have technologies that were done in the 50s and earlier. I love the 50s, don't get me wrong. A good decade as far as I'm concerned. But we need to keep up that investment, and we have new emerging concerns like arsenic. How are we going to get those small systems? Because the technology is expensive. And we have to resolve this. And we have new contaminants coming in, like PFOA and PFOS, all of these chemicals that we're finding in pharmaceuticals. We need not just an upgrade of what used to be, but we need technologies developed that can actually address the problems of today and the future. So we have some real challenges that EPA's operating money is not going to resolve. It's very good to have $2 billion and to shift that to get more into drinking water, but there doesn't have to be a larger conversation about how we keep this core need and right of people in place, as this country has for decades. We just need to take a step back and think this through.
I appreciate that. One quick question. You mentioned in your opening statement that you had $42 million in technical assistance for water systems in small communities and that kind of stuff. You've done away with the proposed, or the Rural Water Technical Assistance Program.
Yes.
Does that mean those funds are transferred over to this?
No, it means that we're going to continue to provide as much resources as we can, but we have different strategies that try to leverage that a little bit further. We're working very closely with USDA and our new financing center to try to figure out how we can work more directly with communities and rural communities. We have funding that's going to tribes. We have funding that's going to the Alaskan Native villages. We have funding that is also dedicated to the Mexico-U.S. border. So we're trying to be a little bit more selective to get at the critical issues, as well as more forward-leaning in terms of how we leverage those funds.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. About 9 months ago, Congressman Kildee approached me, and I'm sure he approached others around here, saying, we need help from the EPA. And I said, we can't do that. That's an earmark for Flint. And we did some investigation, and we found out that the governor could have asked for funding directly, and that wouldn't have been an earmark. I have two little follow-ups, and then I want to get to another question. You referenced the 10 million miles of pipes. Is that what you said? But that's a public pipe. That's not the pipe that goes from where the right-of-way ends in a street into somebody's home. So I have communities that St. Paul and in Stillwater and that with older homes that people are now paying a little more attention to make sure that they're testing for brass and lead. But as your budget's been cut over the years, how has that affected your ability to get in and really do not just a state audit, but an in-depth state audit, really kind of dig in the way that you would like to. And if you could just take just a second on that, because I have another question.
Okay, just a second. There's lead in, mostly it's the service lines into homes that we have concerns with, as well as lead in the homes, and we're working with that. You know, everybody's resources are limited. You know, and we try to work with states to make sure that we marry our resources and effectively get at these issues. And we've also tried to provide some flexibility in the state drinking water fund so that we can use those not just for the public portion, but also you can use those to help support that private system going into the lead line going into the homes. So we're doing what we can with the budget we have, but clearly it's a larger problem that we are facing than we're able to support and take care of in a short period of time. It's going to take a long time.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about a different kind of backlog. The gold mine issue. Last August, while you were investigating the gold mine, the EPA caused an uncontrolled release that spilled contaminated water from a mine into Cement Creek, a tributary of the Amos River. EPA's actions triggered these releases. However, I think it's really important to be clear that the EPA was only doing that work because it was stepping in to clean up an abandoned mine that had been polluting the area for decades. In fact, that mine was already releasing a steady stream of over 300 million gallons of contaminated water each year. This country has a legacy of abandoned mines that pose a safety risk to the public and leach pollutants that contaminate the soil and water. The universe of abandoned mines is huge. In Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico alone, there are 44,000 abandoned mines with no one to hold liable. It falls on the taxpayer to pay for the cleanup for these mines. They mine their profits, they closed up their mines, and they've left. So could you please, as you're dealing with these issues that we're talking about today with Flint and that, I mean, you've got a role in cleaning up pollution from abandoned mines. How many abandoned mines is the EPA currently working on? And if you could also tell us what the EPA has been doing for the Navajo Nation to ensure that their water is properly monitored, and how much assistance and monetary, technical has the EPA been experiencing out? And then, if I might add, I mean, while we're cleaning up these legacy pollution mine issues, what is the EPA doing to make sure that we don't create another legacy of polluted mines?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me try to quickly answer your questions. At this point, I'm aware that we are working directly on probably a little more than a dozen mines, in particular working with states. We have put that work on hold when Gold King Mine happened. We're still talking about how we not only make sure that incident and a release doesn't happen again, but we're called in to deal with issues that the states can't. You know, that's what happened with Gold King Mine, is everybody was concerned about a blowout. That's why we were there. And it is challenging, and there are, as you indicate, thousands of these abandoned mines. And we're working on not as many as we can with the resources that we have and our expertise allows, but we are working on it carefully and making sure that that doesn't happen again, and that we have notification procedures that are much better than we had when Gold King Mine happened. But it is, as you indicate, challenging. And we have already, in terms of your answer to the Navajo Nation, we have already reimbursed the Navajo Nation for their expenses, which is about $158,000. We've done the same for La Plata County, San Juan County. We have an obligation to work with the states as well, and we're doing that. But in addition to that, we have been working with the states and with the affected tribes to put together a long-term monitoring plan that EPA would support. And we've identified $2.4 million, and we're working with states on how best to allocate that and how we can do that in a way that looks not just at the Animas River that was directly impacted, but the San Juan River that was impacted downstream as well. So we're working through these issues, but you're pointing out a very large problem that needs a much broader solution, and I think everybody acknowledges that on both sides of the aisle, that we have abandoned mines that I can't find responsible parties for, that states do not have the resources to address, and we sort of get called in at the last minute to try to resolve these, and it's certainly not an effective cleanup strategy.
Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's good to see you.
You
I
too,
wish we had more time. This is a target-rich environment, there's no doubt. There's so many things that many of us would like to talk to you with.
That makes me nervous when you use the word target.
Well, and having seen just parts of some of your other hearings, I recognize this isn't your favorite thing to do, and I get that. But we also feel compelled to engage with you in some ways about things that many of us are very, very concerned about. And I
Sir,
would
it's
just,
an honor to be here.
well, I appreciate that. It is, just an observation, then I want to get to a specific question. The breakdown in trust between just normal folks, just people, and the federal government is something that I think troubles all of us. And I think that the approach and the aggressiveness of the EPA is one of the keys to that. I really do. And I think we just have to find a way to do better than we've done at this, and not to give people the feeling that the federal government's going to do what they're going to do regardless of how local people feel and the concerns that they may have. I would like to, if I could, pick up on a line of questioning. I wasn't going to do this, but since it came up, I would like to, and that's the Gold King mine. And to review what I know about that came out in recent hearings, 88,000 pounds of metals released in the Animas River, of which affected western states, including my own. And just as a second observation, it's interesting to me how little media has been paid to this. If a private company had done this, I can't help but believe it would have been a very different media story than what we've seen now. Under the reality that it was the EPA who did it, not a private company. And when you review the EPA's assumptions, from the layout of what they thought the mine consisted of, I know you know this, but state it for the record, that contradicted public records. Assuming the water was only halfway up the mine, they didn't test for water pressure. Even things like the on-site commander leaving on vacation, leaving instructions that were apparently discarded or not adhered to. And my question is, can you tell us where your investigation is and who has been held accountable for I believe, at least the dereliction of responsibilities in this? Because it's been long enough now. We should know what happened and who was responsible and how they have been held accountable.
Well, sir, we have both done an internal investigation at EPA that has been provided publicly. The Office of Inspector General has looked at it. We looked for and received an independent investigation by the Department of the Interior. So we believe we have provided information to folks, and just for factual basis. I mean, EPA was there working with the state and with the Animas River Group to try to figure out how to be helpful here. There is no question that the work that we did resulted in the blowout. But I don't want anyone to think that EPA was there at the time of the blowout to do anything other than to continue the preparatory work for when the lead was coming back and going to continue to consult with BLM and others on how best to address this issue. It was a mistake. Do I think that have I found anyone that didn't act responsibly and that should have known better? So far, the independent analysis that we're seeing has not identified negligence, but we're still continuing to look at that issue, and we'd welcome anyone else doing that as well. Having said that, we had a release there, and it was a large release. That's what we were trying to avoid. It was 3 million gallons. And we're going to make good on making sure that that didn't have a long-term impact. We do not see a short-term impact as a result of that, because frankly, 300 million gallons of contaminated water is released into that Cement Creek and into the Animas River every single year. And so 3 million sounds like a lot, but in the context we're trying to get at these things in a piecemeal way. Certainly it was not successful in terms of the preparatory work, and it did cause this spill.
Well, and I would just say in conclusion, I think the challenge you have is to fight the perception, if it is only a perception,
Yeah.
and I'm not certain that it is, but to fight the perception that the federal government treated themselves differently than they would
You're
have treated a
absolutely right.
private company. Because I think there's a consensus among at least my constituents that there's a double standard here, and that this is evidence of a double standard.
Well, I really appreciate it, sir. You're absolutely right that we need to make it very clear that we're holding ourselves fully accountable for this. And I do wish that some of these abandoned mines had individuals we could hold accountable, but that's not the way that the law and the process is structured. So but I thank you. You're absolutely right. We need to be clear about what we're doing and why, and be held fully accountable for this.
Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for being back with us. I think one of the most important challenges in the region I represent is the recovery of Puget Sound. And in recent years, we've taken some steps in the right direction. And for that, I want to recognize the EPA and your regional administrator, Dennis McLaren, and Peter Murchie, who's the Puget Sound Program Manager, for the hard work they've done. And you got to see just how important Puget Sound is to our region when you came out in 2014. We'd love to invite you back. But your local team has done, I think, a excellent job with the resources that they have available. And having said that, I think we can all agree that we've got a long way to go on addressing this challenge. And I hope you had a chance to see a recent study that was done by NOAA and Washington State University that documents the fatal impacts of stormwater runoff impacting the coho salmon as they're entering the sound. And unfortunately, this study confirms what a lot of us already knew, which is that toxic runoff is damaging water quality and hurting key resources like salmon and shellfish that aren't just important from an environmental ethic, but are critical drivers of our economy. And Chairman and Ranking Member, if there's no objection, I'd ask for a copy of this report to be submitted to the record. And sadly, this is just one of the challenges we have facing Puget Sound. Stormwater is one piece of it, habitat loss, ocean acidification, coastal erosion, the list goes on. And the impacts of these challenges are being felt through our communities. It's certainly felt through our economy with the impact to our fisheries, and it's perhaps most acutely felt by the Native American tribes with treaty rights to harvest fish and shellfish from this watershed, and 11 of which are in my district. So let me move to I guess, ask a question. The funds provided through the Puget Sound Geographic Program and the National Estuary Program are critical to supporting the recovery effort. Can you discuss how the investments made in the EPA's FY17 budget will actually advance this work, and whether the requested funding levels actually get us there?
Well, first of all, let me say that your leadership has been incredibly important, and the Puget Sound program is filled with incredibly dedicated people. And I'm happy that we're able to at least seek some additional support for that, which we see primarily dedicated towards riparian buffers, because, as you indicate, that is a significant challenge. But there's much work that remains. And I think the region is intimately involved in understanding of what we need to do to protect Puget Sound. It's going to take a variety of actions that we're engaged in and things we haven't even begun to do. So this is in no way a done deal, but frankly, the geographic programs have been a great opportunity for us to focus attention on critical estuaries and resources that otherwise would get lost competing for money. And so we're perfectly happy to continue to work with the Puget Sound program to see how we could support that effort in a variety of different ways, including using our other statutory tools that are available to us.
So in that regard, I know the EPA isn't alone in this effort. There's other federal players,
Yes.
tribal players, state players, local partners. Can you talk about how the EPA is coordinating those recovery efforts, and if there are any additional resources or authorities that you think are needed to better align those activities?
Well, I certainly know that there are other federal agencies involved in the program and coordinating with us. They provide resources, for example, like NOAA is certainly intimately involved in these issues, as is DOI and USDA, and we align our resources as best we can. I think that it is a good collaboration, and one in which I think the Puget Sound program helps to identify, but always improvements can be made, and we'd be certainly open to suggestions of how we may do better.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we've got before us the President's request to fund what I see as the final chapter in this administration's war on coal. You know, for almost 8 years, the administration has unapologetically and systematically worked to shut down our country's most abundant, reliable, and cheapest form of energy, coal. But what this administration, the EPA, doesn't understand is what their actions have done to the people of West Virginia. So, Ms. McCarthy, in your official role as the head of the EPA, have you actually been to West Virginia in the last 3 years since you took the head of the EPA?
I cannot recall.
I know you were invited. So since you refused to come to West Virginia, you simply don't understand, in my opinion, how your agency has devastated my state. Here's what life is like for many families in southern West Virginia. Coal jobs have plunged more than 50% in just the last 5 years. And you know, these are good jobs. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average wage of a coal miner is over $84,000 a year. Compare that to our state's average wage, which is less than $37,000 a year. Coal jobs provide a true living wage that support a family. Coal jobs also come with really good benefits, a pension and health care benefits a retiree can count on. But not anymore. The bankruptcies of our country's largest coal companies have left pensioners and widows desperate for help. And because of your actions, West Virginia now has one of the highest unemployment rates in the entire country. For the past few months, I've been sharing the stories of West Virginia families on the House floor as part of my West Virginia Coal Voices project. Mothers, fathers, coal miners, small business owners, they're all worried about their future. April Brooks of Mercer County is the wife of a coal miner and says she wonders if her family has a future in West Virginia. Here's what she wrote me. Like every family that depends on coal for a living, we live day to day worrying about what will happen tomorrow. You can't plan for the future because of the uncertainty. We love our state, but how does one stay here and survive if the jobs aren't there? Administrator, your war on coal impacts so many more people and businesses than just the thousands of direct mining jobs. Teresa Haywood of McDowell County, she owns a small business and her customers are affected by the coal layoffs. Here's what she wrote me. Our business has dropped majorly, and I am struggling day to day just to try to decide to pay the bills or to restock. People keep asking me, am I going to keep my business open? The war on coal also affects our schools, our police, our fire departments, all of which are funded by coal severance taxes. In just the last few years, severance tax revenue has dropped by nearly $150 million in West Virginia. As coal mines shut down, communities have less and have to make tough decisions. Stacy Walls of Boone County reached out to me concerned about her son's future. Here's what she wrote me. My county is closing my son's school due to not having coal tax revenues that help keep it open. My son's education is now going to suffer because of the war on coal. This Congress is trying its best to stop your agenda, an ideologically driven agenda hell-bent on shutting down the use of fossil fuels for energy production. We've used the power of the purse and included policy writers on funding bills. We've supported the legal challenges brought by a majority of the states, led by Democrats and Republicans alike, trying to stop your regulatory overreach. The Supreme Court has already said you erred in not considering the economic costs of your regulations, the kinds of things I've been talking about. And the Government Accountability Office said you acted in covert propaganda and grassroots lobbying in violation of federal law. But despite our best efforts, you have succeeded in wrecking our economy and ruining the lives and livelihoods of thousands of our citizens. Regardless of one's belief in the President's climate change agenda, his drive, your drive, to succeed has been devastating to the people of West Virginia and to the tens of thousands of others across this country who work to fuel this nation. Administrator, West Virginians are a proud people. We want to work. We want to provide a better future for our children. Let us do the work we have done for generations, work that provides a good paycheck and keeps the lights on. And until you actually visit the coal fields of West Virginia, you will never understand the impact of your actions. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, General. I guess the question is, are you going to plan on visiting West Virginia before the end of the year?
I'll take that under consideration,
It's a
Mr.
beautiful
Chairman.
state to visit, by the way. Next is Mr. Israel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCarthy, I want to shift from one sound to another sound, from Puget Sound to Long Island Sound. Not to belabor Mr. Jenkins' point about you not visiting West Virginia, I have to say I'm disappointed that you weren't able to visit Long Island Sound. I understood that you had a crisis in Colorado that you had to attend to. I'm disappointed that we weren't able to reschedule that. I hope that the book is not closed on that, and so you can come to Long Island, get a flight to West Virginia. It's not that hard. Well, maybe it is hard. Mr. McCarthy, so I do hope that you will consider visiting the Long Island Sound. The Long Island Sound, which is obviously important not just to our country, particularly to Ms. Lowy and I and so many others, generally receives funding of about $4 million a year. The President's budget requests $3 million. $4 million is about half of what the Long Island Sound actually needs. $3 million is $1 million less than it has been getting. And I'm very deeply concerned about the adequacy of those resources. The Long Island Sound is the biggest economic generator in my region. It may not be coal. For us, it is the Long Island Sound. Billions of dollars of economic activity. If we were a company town, the Long Island Sound would be our company. And the declining level of federal resources is not just a problem for us in terms of protecting our environment. It is a problem for us in terms of protecting our economy. The good news is that there is bipartisan legislation introduced by my colleague on Long Island, Mr. Zeldin, and I, that would reauthorize the Long Island Sound Restoration and Stewardship Act. We were able to pass this legislation about 10 years ago with a former Republican member from Connecticut, Mr. Simmons, and I, and it was signed by President Bush and approved by the House of Representatives. The bill was passed unanimously in the Senate just some time ago. We're hoping that it will be on the floor before too long in the House. The problem that I have is if this bill is passed, and I expect that it will be because it's always been bipartisan, we're looking at the potential of $65 million of grant opportunities in a Long Island Sound Program Geographic Office that is inadequate to the task. So I'm hoping that you can talk to us about why $3 million. What do we need to do to increase that investment? And will the Long Island Sound Geographic Program Office have the resources necessary to attend to the tasks?
Well, first of all, thank you, Congressman, and I think you know how much I care about Long Island Sound as well. So it's an incredible resource for the region, but it's an incredible ecological resource. And it is challenged. It's challenged because so many people live around it that depend on it. And so the funding is not a reflection of the agency's lack of interest and enthusiasm for its protection. It's just budget realities in terms of how we can continue to move forward. You're right that we are proposing a decrease in that funding, but we are also maintaining 2.8, almost $3 million in investment there. We're hoping that, we're confident that the program can continue to run, but I think you're right in terms of looking at what are the opportunities for additional funding that's needed to be brought to the table to make sure that we can continue to make steady progress. We're making some difficult choices, and I cannot apologize for that, but I certainly know that EPA cannot turn around Long Island Sound and protect it without significantly more resources from the neighboring states, as well as other ways in which we can potentially leverage those funds.
Thank you, Madam Director, and I do hope that your staff and my staff can reconsider, review the invitation, and that you can find time to visit. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll be working together on that issue. Next, Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sure to no one's surprise here, I'd like to ask you, Administrator McCarthy, a few questions about the Great Lakes, if you will.
That's your...
Really, something new and different for me. You know, it's amazing to me that the largest system of surface fresh water on Earth is 20% of the world's surface fresh water, 95% of the United States. The watershed includes 2 nations, 8 U.S. states, 2 Canadian provinces, and more than 40 tribes. How will the administration's proposed $50 million cut to the GLRI impact our ability to restore and maintain the environmental integrity of the Great Lakes ecosystem?
I think as I indicated, there are some difficult decisions. It is still proposing $250,000, which, I'm sorry, million. Yeah, you know that. That would be a real dramatic change.
Yes, it would be.
Yeah, 250
Consider we started at $500 million. You've been weaning us down ever since.
Yes. It is, we understand the value of the Great Lakes. We're trying to coordinate. I think we have done a good job at enhancing coordination across the federal family to support the effort there, because that's what it needs to be. There are remaining challenges. The $50 million that we're suggesting in a cut is just a reality of trying to face our budget constraints, but we're certainly open, and we know that there will continue to be a lot of push for that to be restored. We're happy to talk about what other kind of leveraging we can do. We know we have work to do. We've done great so far, but the work remains in terms of looking at our harmful algal blooms, looking at invasive species, looking at those areas of concern and continuing to make progress. There's a lot of challenges that are being faced that are worthy of significant investment if that money was available.
Well, you're starting to hit on some of the other topics I want to follow up
Yeah.
on. And the areas of concern, since it was started in 2010, 3 areas of concern have been delisted, which one of them being the Ashtabula River in my district, which is a wonderful thing. And as your people were out there, it was as though it was on cue. An eagle flew, just as the press was there and all. But which areas of concerns will have to postpone restoration sites if you're going to cut this by $50 million?
I'm actually not aware that any of those sites would be postponed, but I certainly can get back to you. I think mainly we're looking at maintaining those resources to those efforts. We have a number that are targeted this year, but let me go back and I'll get you that information if I could.
Now, I should follow up with this question. I learned a great lesson from Representative Capter when we were in our full committee, and she had the pictures of these ugly fish out there, and she put the picture out there. But we don't have it. But to keep the self-sustaining populations of silver, bighead, and black carp out of the Great Lakes, we too received $57 million in 16 to combat the invasive species. Your budget would cut that to $43.6 million. Yet in 2015, juvenile Asian carp advanced 66 miles closer to Lake Michigan. How will proposed funding reduction impact efforts to prevent the carp from spreading further?
Again, sir, I don't have exact identification of where the funding cuts would be made. I appreciate your concern for this. A video is even better than pictures, because it's pretty frightening. And I know that is one of the areas of priority for funding moving forward.
And you touched on this briefly, but I want to get back to it, the algal blooms.
Yeah.
In the past 2 years, there have been harmful algal blooms that have impacted access to safe drinking water for residents, obviously in Toledo, Ms. Capter's district. The 2015 harmful algal bloom on Lake Erie was recorded as the largest bloom this century. The GLRI non-point source pollution impacts on nearshore health focus area received $49 million in 2016, in part to address the situation on Lake Erie. However, the administration's 2017 would cut this non-point source pollution impact to $45.3 million. In February, you joined Canada's Environment and Climate Change Minister, Catherine McKenna, to announce that Canada and the U.S. adopted targets to reduce phosphorus entering affected areas of Lake Erie by 40%. How will the proposed FY 2017 funding level help us achieve this goal?
Well, it certainly will continue the momentum moving forward. There certainly has to be a larger conversation about how quickly we can achieve those goals, working with state and local communities and how best to do that. But it maintains, I think, the emphasis on the program in a way that our budget accommodates. Certainly, we're still open to whether or not those budgets are aligned effectively, whether they're targeted appropriately, how we can work with USDA on some of these issues. I sympathize with what's happening going on in Western Lake Erie, but it's also happening in many other parts of the country, and we have to address this issue systemically as well as in a targeted way as GLRI does.
And obviously, that's the one part that really bothers me, is until people lose a potable water supply, they don't understand and appreciate the fact that there's not a redundant one. And, you know, we for years, every year I've been here now, we've watched the administration cut this amount. And they know, because we have tremendous bipartisan support on this issue, that we're doing our best to protect and preserve what, not just a lake or a series of lakes, but a national treasure. And we need to treat it that way, and we need to continue to treat it that way. And I don't think that relying on us to do the heavy lifting, the administration should be out front and work with our international partners to make sure that this efforts are coordinated.
I appreciate that, sir, and I'm not trying to put you in a position of doing heavy lifting, but we are trying to meet the bipartisan Budget Act numbers. And I would also, just as an aside, recognize that part of the challenge we had in Toledo, it was twofold. It was one of the harmful algal blooms, but it was also a lack of investment. So it goes back to that overall look at what we do with water infrastructure and how we get resources that can help communities address these challenges to update, because that is what essentially was missing in that scenario.
And dredging and dropping it back in the lake instead of taking it out of the lake.
That is another challenge as well, and I know you've been active in that. You've been active in many ways that I think recognize the value of the Great Lakes to your region, and it's of enormous concern to all of us.
Well, thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. Ms. Pingree.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Administrator, for being with us here today. I know this is not an easy job, and you've certainly had a lot of challenges in recent times. I want to take us on a somewhat different path. I'm interested in the topic of food waste, and I know the EPA has set some interesting goals. I know my colleagues are riveted by this topic, but 40% of the food in this country is wasted, and we have a lot of hardworking farmers and others who spend a lot to produce that food, and we have a lot of people going hungry in this country. So it's a very serious issue. I've introduced a bill called the Food Recovery Act because I do think this is something we have to take on the challenge, and I'm very pleased that the EPA and the USDA have set national food waste reduction goals, which is a 50% reduction by 2030 in the amount of food we waste. I was very happy to be on a panel the other day with Maddie Stanislas, who I guess is the Assistant Administrator in the Office of Solid Waste in your organization, and clearly you have people out there working hard on it. But now that you've got this big goal, and I know a little bit about how hard it is to tackle some of these issues at all levels of how we waste food, can you talk to me a little more about what the EPA's goals are and what you're doing to make this a reality?
Well, as you indicated, we have embraced with USDA an opportunity to look at food waste more successfully, given how much is actually wasted and how many people in this country have food insecurity. There's got to be a way to mix and match in making sure that we're recovering that waste and shipping off what's usable to reach those families in need. That's what the challenge is all about. And we're working on it in a number of different ways. I think the issue or the program I would most note is our Food Recovery Challenge, which is really just about connecting with supermarkets to see how they buy, how they donate, working with local restaurants, working with food shelters, connecting those dots. We're now done extensive outreach to the faith community to try to activate them because, as you know, poverty and food issues are central to most faith constituencies. So they're great in working with us both on water quality as well as this effort. And we're open to any suggestions on how we move this forward. But there seems to be a building momentum on this, and that is a good thing. And it's all the way upstream to agriculture where the food is produced, to getting it to the tables where the food can be consumed, especially by those most in need. But it is a big lift to go from where we are today, which is close to 40% wasted, to actually meeting and having that in a fairly short period of time. But people seem energized and engaged. It is not a largely resourced effort of EPA or USDA, and I think both Secretary Vilsack and I are committed to making sure we leverage our resources wisely, but really do it in a way that engages outside constituencies who see this as such a core effort moving forward. And it's exciting to see it building some momentum.
Well, thank you for that. And I appreciate that you're trying to look at it at all levels and work with the USDA, and along with the challenges of making sure food gets into the hands of people who need it and are hungry. There are some serious environmental challenges of how we dispose of food waste and the gases produced, right, which is much more toxic than many of the gases that we worry about. Plus, it's a huge cost to municipalities. One of the challenges when we try to do something about a problem with limited resources is how the agencies coordinate, and how is that going between you and the USDA, since you're kind of the two key agencies on this?
I think we're coordinating well, but we also are looking at having a much more robust strategy. I think it goes well beyond the few people we're dedicating to food recovery. It's just not commensurate with the challenge, or frankly, the real opportunity that we see. But we'll continue to work. We need a strategy that will get us to meet that 2050 goal, and we're working on how best to do that.
Well, I appreciate that. I will have another question if we get in a second round, but I did want to just make a quick comment on Mr. Jenkins. I'm sorry he's no longer here, and I feel very, very sympathetic for any rural state that has to deal with the loss of high-paying jobs. I know in the state of Maine we've lost a tremendous number of our paper mills. It seems to be happening at a rate higher than people can even kind of fathom, and those are the same kinds of jobs. They're high-paying jobs. They come with benefits. It's staggering, particularly in a rural state, when those things change. But I just wanted to add sort of another perspective. Since Maine tends to be the state kind of at the end of the tailpipe, and coal-fired power plants have been a huge issue for our state for a long time, you think about going to Maine and you think, oh, pristine air, this wonderful, state on the ocean, but frankly, we have some of the worst air in the country. 1 in 10 people in Maine have asthma. We have a tremendous number of children with asthma. It's one of the biggest reasons for emergency room admission, and it's the 4th most common reason that people miss going to work. So people who have jobs often can't go because they have asthma. So I just wanted to add in the other perspective that while I'm very sympathetic about the loss of jobs, and Mr. Rogers is here too, and he represents so many important coal country communities, but it's a huge challenge making sure that those of us who really suffer from the air at the other end are also able to have clean air and reduce the amount of very costly illnesses and tragic situations that many people are in because of that. So I want to thank you from the other side, and I know it's not easy, and I know we're always trying to deal with that balance. It's tricky, so thank you for that.
With that, I'm happy to recognize our full committee chairman, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are over 10,000 miners in my district who found themselves unemployed as a result of your keep it in the ground strategy when it comes to coal. This committee has acted time and again to protect the mining industry and the hardworking people that they employ from the devastating impact of the actions of your agency. I have to imagine that you understand how these regulations have led to many counties in my district grappling with 15 or 20% unemployment. But can you imagine what it must be like for that miner, that father, with small children, formerly making $70,000, $80,000, all of a sudden trying to find a job at McDonald's unsuccessfully at minimum wage with small children and car payments and home payments, house payments, school payments. Devastating. Nevertheless, here you are asking for more taxpayer money to put toward this job of killing coal. In fact, you've asked for an additional $50 million for the EPA's Clean Power Plan. Since the Supreme Court issued that stay of your final regulations implementing the Clean Power Plan last month, I've seen conflicting reports regarding the deadlines for state actions that were included in the final rule. My understanding is that the Justice Department, in opposing the stay, advised that the deadlines would be delayed for the duration of the stay. But Acting Assistant Administrator McCabe recently indicated that the deadlines may remain in effect. Can you assure us today that the agency will, as you have done when implementing other rules, delay the deadlines in the rule until the courts have issued their final decision?
I'm happy to answer that question. The Supreme Court did stay the rule. They did not speak to any tolling of the deadlines. This is a rule where the compliance is quite far off into the future. So that issue will clearly be decided either by the Supreme Court or if they choose to give it to the lower court or to EPA to work through. There are a variety of ways that those issues get resolved, but it was not spoken to by the Supreme Court in its decision.
In December, the Wall Street Journal reported that the Energy and Environment Legal Institute obtained emails indicating that EPA worked with environmental lobbyists in secret to craft its Clean Power Plan. The correspondence they obtained made it clear that this group of lobbyists, with ties to extreme environmental groups like the Sierra Club, NRDC, and Clean Air Task Force, worked with the agency to craft a CO2 emissions standard that would be impossible for existing coal plants to meet. Essentially, EPA worked with these extreme environmentalists to ensure that under the rule, all existing coal-fired power plants would have no choice but to close. There's no question that the Clean Power Plan will fundamentally alter the energy economy in this country and put thousands of hardworking men and women who are employed in the coal industry out of work. Why is the EPA allowing these individuals, who are not employees of this agency, to be so heavily involved with the drafting of rules with such significant impact?
Well, sir, I will assure you that EPA drafted this rule. We had an open-door policy from day one, and we worked for years before we even proposed a rule to make sure we heard from everyone. We believe the standards are reasonable and not just appropriate, but cost-effective as well, or else we would not have established them. So we are not looking to preclude coal from being a significant part of the energy system, and indeed we project it will continue to be. But we do believe that facilities can comply, and we think that states will be able to meet the requirements under the Clean Power Plan.
Well, the truth is that power plants cannot possibly physically do what you would require, and so they have no choice but to switch to something else. It's impossible, physically impossible, for them to meet your requirements. What do you say to that?
Well, so the way the Clean Power Plan works is that states make decisions instead of individual utilities and how they're going to comply, because that's the way the energy system works. It's done regionally primarily. And we just wrote it in a way that we thought would be the least expensive, the less invasive, get us significant pollution reductions, but work within the energy system rather than EPA imposing on that energy system a new structure of decision-making. So we think it's consistent with the way the energy system works, that utilities will be able to work with this, that states should be able to manage this, and we're working hard to continue where states are voluntarily looking to move forward to continue to support those actions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Chairman. Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask another question, and I really would like to get that in, but I want to follow up on what Chairman Rogers was saying. In my own congressional district in St. Paul, I had an electric utility that made a decision to convert from coal to gas, but it also has a coal-fired plant in Stillwater, Minnesota, on the St. Croix River. We also have nuclear, we have solar, we have wind. We would like to have more funding go into R&D so we can capture it and store it in a battery. But in Minnesota, Governor Dayton in our legislature has decided to move forward, as well as other states, knowing that coal will be part of the mix, but also making sure that we do what we can to protect our air and water. So could you please maybe let us know how many states are responding in a way to move forward with that? And are you going to have the resources available to help those states move forward that are choosing to do so? And then I have a question with tribal issues.
Well, thank you so much for letting me respond. There are about 25 states that at least have sent signals or continue to work with us directly. Frankly, most states continue to talk about this and work on it because the Clean Power Plan is legally solid. And I think everybody wants to get a jump on how they're looking at planning to respond to that. So about 25 states are continuing to voluntarily ask us for assistance and work on those plans.
In my state, my utilities working hand in hand.
Oh, the utilities are very engaged in this issue because, frankly, the energy system is transitioning already. And they're trying to understand what their investment should look like now so that they prepare for what is inevitably a low-carbon future. So we're going to continue to work with that. This budget reflects about $50.5 million, 25 of which would be supplied to states that continue to voluntarily want to move forward, and the other 25.5 is really about us continuing to develop tools that respond to their requests and continue to work with those states that want to voluntarily work with us. But it in no way is running contrary to the Supreme Court stay. We are not implementing or enforcing the law while it goes through the courts. And everybody sort of expected it would go through the courts anyways.
Thank you. Last week, this subcommittee spent 2 days listening to American Native tribal leaders in public witness testimony. One thing we heard concerns about was the discrepancy on how the tribes are requesting and what they're actually receiving from the Great Lakes Restoration Fund. So tribes are an essential partner in restoring the health of the Great Lakes. and the process of solidifying grants must be fair for all applicants, especially tribes. So, I believe, and I think there's other committee members here who would agree, that it's imperative that they have the resources and the staff to develop a competitive grant proposal so that they're able to manage and protect their natural resources. And I can speak for many of the tribes in the Great Lakes area. They have terrific working relationships with their state partners. So could you either tell us now or later, how many grants have been awarded to tribes since 2010 when GLRI was launched, and what has been the total amount of funding that's been awarded to tribes? And what kind of engagement is EPA doing with tribes to ensure that their grant proposals are competitive?
Yeah.
Because this also affects another area. And here again, I commend Governor Dayton. He proposed legislation to work closely with tribal nations to secure their rights to hunt and gather wild ripe and to support their traditional diet in the Ojibwe culture. So he has heard, I'm sure, from tribal leaders as well as I have, that they want to make sure that the habitat that they hunt and fish in is not damaged. So you can also tell me how the EPA is working to keep waterways healthy enough to support tribal treaty rights, traditional substance of foods, and how aggressively you are making sure that tribal consultation is moving forward, especially in the area of sulfite mining.
I'm happy to follow up with you. Thank you.
Just a comment, and I have a question. It seems that I've been charting the coal industry for some time, and it looks from the book value of those corporations, they've been driven to near zero. Bankruptcies, as obviously you read about daily in the newspapers. So the administration plan was to destroy that industry. It appears that you've succeeded.
The only thing I can tell you, sir, if you look back to the 80s, you'll see that there has been a consistent decline in that industry, and that's well before we move forward with a climate plan.
Nothing like we've seen in the last number of years.
Well, it's very challenging for particularly the coal from the Appalachian area to be competitive right now in the market. But EPA specifically tried to identify a way to deliver the Clean Power Plan in a way that wouldn't interrupt the pattern of how the market works, but it really it does underpin it. But it doesn't change the direction in which we think the energy system is happening on its own as a result of the market forces.
I'm going to change directions entirely and talk about pesticides.
Yes.
And this may be something that may be going to the top of your to-do list because of the numbers of problems that are coming to the United States. I don't want to be an alarmist, but obviously we know about the citrus industry in Florida.
Yes.
And the psyllid issue, and it's also moving across the country, including to my home state of California. We've already experienced the Pierce's disease, which has another insect, glassy winged sharpshooter, which is the vector. EPA had granted waivers in order for us to fight that disease, or the grape industry would have been crushed in the wrong way, and we would have had a devastating effect in our wine industry, and we need wine right now as a country to get through from day to day. And lastly, and more seriously, now the Zika virus.
Yes.
The chairman and I were just recently in South America. We visited laboratories that are working on trying to get ahead of this problem.
Yes.
And it's I think the chairman would agree, we were very concerned after the briefings that we received of the spread of this mosquito across, certainly right now in Puerto Rico and moving into Florida, that there may be a need for pesticides to be used. And I know at some point you have to make decisions. You have to balance the health and welfare of the citizens versus maybe some respects the environment, but to fight this mosquito, which apparently is a very hard mosquito to kill. And I'm sure you probably have had briefings on this already, but maybe you can share with us what activities EPA is involved in.
Sure.
Would they need to grant waivers to fight? It seems like we got to get on this immediately.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for raising this issue, because it is something that the entire federal family has been working together on. EPA's role really is reflective of how we mitigate the challenge. How can we mitigate and impact the habitats that would be mosquito breeding and take care of that issue. But we also are looking at what we need to do to make sure that we have pesticides approved that can attack this, and how do we do training. And we are focusing that training, thankfully. Florida is very strong in terms of their ability to be able to manage this issue and have certified applicators and a strong regulatory system. We're focusing a lot of attention in Puerto Rico, as well as the Virgin Islands, where their system of sort of regulatory system is not quite as strong, and we want to make sure that when pesticides are used, they're applied carefully. There are a number of pesticides that are approved by EPA and effective, as well as they can be, both on for outside spraying as well as indoor use. And we're continuing to work with NIH to see if there are others that we can bring into the system. And as a federal family, we're looking to make sure that those pesticides that work are properly manufactured and at levels that can be distributed as this Zika virus is progressing. And it is an enormous challenge to work on this. And it's one that I think the federal government is looking for appropriate support from this body, but also EPA is looking to make sure we do our work with the NIH to get the products out in the market that we believe can be safely applied and can help in this effort.
Appreciate the answer. Next, Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McCollum mentioned the significant cut made to the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and given the significant infrastructure needs across the country, can you just discuss how you anticipate this cut will impact state and local and tribal governments that are working to invest in clean water infrastructure?
Well, it is definitely a shift in what we see, and it's based on the needs out there long-term. It's a shift a little bit more towards the drinking water side than it is the clean water side. Part of the challenge we have is to make sure that we certainly live within our budget, and we've done our best to reflect where we think the priorities need to be. But beyond that, we're trying to look at how we, in this fiscal year, start supporting WIFIA, because that leverages or has an opportunity to leverage private sector dollars as well in a way that is much larger leveraging opportunity than we have under the state revolving fund. So we're looking at a $20 million investment there. We're also looking at our water infrastructure and resilience financing center to continue to support that effort, because they're providing a lot of opportunity to work with rural communities and small systems to think more creatively about what opportunities are available. We're looking at continuing to look at the flexibilities that we have under the State Drinking Water Fund. But I think all in all, we're also looking at using, I think, some visibility and concern that have risen as a result of Flint to sort of raise the flag, if you will, to say that all of these efforts are good. And we're directing more efforts to the, Mexico-U.S. border and to the Alaskan tribes, but we need to do more. We really need to step back and recognize that our water infrastructure is old. Investments are not being made at a rate that would keep that to be the modern system that we once had. And there are challenges both with legacy and emerging contaminants that really require us to think about new technologies on how to drive those and invest in them. So there does need to be a larger discussion and opportunity to take a deep breath and see whether or not clean water remains a core need and value of this country, and whether or not we're providing the investments we need for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, and follow up on that answer. We have had a hearing here, how long ago was it? 2013, 3 years ago, on alternative financing methods to address this backlog of unmet needs, because quite frankly, the way we're going at it now, it's just going to grow. we're never gonna address and get to the end of this backlog of maintenance needs in water and sewer programs. And so I think the industry and regulators and others need to get together with Congress and look at alternative methods of financing these. But I just wanted to agree with Mr. Kilmer that I think Dennis McLaren does a great job out in Region 10. We're having a little difference with him on the state, with Region 10 and the state and fish consumption and a few things like that, but we have differences, and we'll hopefully work those out. But again, I will submit that for the record. But I just wanted to point out, as we're kind of getting ready to wrap things up here in a little bit, I think the chairman said that non-defense discretionary spending under the budget deal is at $40 million. Is that right? That's assuming we can accept the budget deal at some point in time and get a budget passed or whatever. Under the best of all possible worlds, given the budget deal that was passed last year. So non-defense discretionary spending is up $40 million. You've asked for an increase of 127 million. We've used gimmicks in it, as we did in the energy and water bill and other things, shifting things into mandatory funding, things that we know aren't going to happen, tax increases that we're pretty sure aren't going to happen. I don't see us putting on the oil barrel tax or some of the other things that are used. Well, you can vote for it. So we've got all of those conflicts, and yet you sit here and you listen to all of us, and we've talked about the Long Island Sound needing more funding, Puget Sound needing more funding, Great Lakes Initiative, both here and here, needing more funding, DERA needing more funding, rural water technical programs needing more funding, STAG grants needing more funding. All that given the circumstances that we're probably going to have at least a flat and maybe even a reduced budget in overall budget in this coming year. That's the challenge that we're going to face, given the need that's out there. And we're going to have to balance those competing interests and try to put together a bill, because it's not just the EPA and the programs within the EPA that we will have some differences on. It's all the myriad of different programs that are under Chairman Calvert's purview now, and in that bill. And it's going to be a tough one to write, a lot tougher than most people think. So I just wanted to bring that into reality.
And none of us have an easy job with this, and I really appreciate the subcommittee and obviously the committee chair being here to try to identify paths forward. It's always a respectful and good conversation here, and I thank you for it.
Thank you.
Ms. Pingree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Both of my last two colleagues mentioned the Clean Water Revolving Fund, and I just want to add that, for many of the municipalities in our state, that's so critically important, and I think you know that. And I'll just throw in brownfields, too, because that's another thing that's just been really beneficial to economic development, and I don't have to tell you, but those are really critically important when it comes to funding. And I will just bring up one last topic, and that's about bees and pollinators. I know that you take that very seriously, and Mr. Calvert brought up one of the issues around pesticides and allowing for new pesticides, and all of us are very concerned about Zika virus and many of these things, and making sure that we really do have a way to control them. The reverse of that is the impact on pollinators. I know Mr. Simpson is deeply concerned about the monarch butterfly. We have our own mini caucus here that's never been formalized but is there. But I just want to bring up the fact that this recent GAO report criticized the EPA for ignoring the assessment of the impacts of multiple pesticides on bees. And this is not an easy topic, but we know that neonicotinoids are one of the biggest issues. In some areas they're banned, in other countries. And it is just critically important, given the fact that 80% of all flowering plants around the world need to be pollinated by bees. We've already had a few crises. We're very worried about the impact of glyphosate-resistant weeds in our agricultural system. We have 70 million acres of the United States that are infested with them. We're worried about their impact on the monarch butterfly through milkweed. I don't have to tell you all this, but
This makes me feel good. You share the pain.
hey, I'm sharing your pain, and the GAO just has a brand-new report out saying, USDA and EPA have to do more on this. You have to coordinate better. And frankly, this is very complex, particularly with the use of multiple chemicals in the same agricultural setting. So it's a tough balance because, we want to make sure we have those pesticides available when it comes to disease control and other things like this mosquito-borne virus. But on the other hand, we can't afford to lose our pollinators. So how can you do a little more on this, and how are you going to address the concerns that the GAO just brought up?
I think the GAO is always right. We need to continue to collaborate. That's why the White House pulled together the National Pollinator Health Strategy that was announced back in last year in May. It's extremely important for us to look at sending all the right signals to the industry itself, so that you have beekeepers in the agriculture community able to communicate with one another and develop a strategy that both protects the pollinators, as well as allows us to utilize pesticides and other things that are vital to agriculture moving forward. These are not easy issues. One of the things, as I think we did, is we're really requiring registrants to look at conducting new bee safety studies as they're looking at new types of pesticides. We're doing the best we can to start building it into the system as a fundamental look. And we're looking to work more effectively with USDA as well as the services at the full range of impacts, not just health, but ecological impacts and impacts to the pollinators as well. So we're doing the best we can, and we're getting more information as this attention has come up. The science is getting better, and as the science gets better, we utilize it in our decision-making, and we're looking forward to collaborating more effectively in the future with our federal family.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I don't disagree, Ms. Pingree. Obviously, if there's other alternatives to pesticides, I'm all for it. As a matter of fact, my own area, University of California, we have, I think, the largest laboratory in the United States on beneficial insects. And we, in California, have used those over 100 years to combat various types of insects. But if there is a health emergency, and God, we all here agree, we don't want that to happen, but sometimes decisions have to be made, and I would hope that you plan for the worst-case scenarios as well as to be prepared if, in fact, we have to react quickly. Because you may be in a situation here shortly, you may have to. This may not be as bad a problem as we think. It may be a lot worse than we think. So.
Well, I think we're doing a pretty good job, sir, when these emergencies arise, at approving the exemptions that are in the system, and we're able to do. We did that with the state of Florida as they were approaching their next season, when they had to look at how to apply pesticides in a way that would address citrus greening. So you're absolutely right. Fortunately, the law allows us to have that type of expedited review, and we do the best we can to make sure we do it in a timely way.
Yeah, because as you know, Florida now, I think they've lost a third of their citrus throughout the state. The citrus industry believes they'll be totally out of the citrus business here if this continues in the next 5 years. California, we have the psyllid in California. We do not yet have the disease associated with it, except in a very defined area which we're trying to control. So we're sometimes asking for those waivers to get in there and deal with this issue as rapidly as we can.
And we're really trying to respond to them, as is USDA, and looking at how we do research to get a better solution on the table than these interim exemptions provide.
And we all want to keep I think it was Albert Einstein that once said, if you want to destroy the human race, destroy the bee population in the world, and it'll all be over. So I understand that, so we need to make sure that we don't do that. Any additional questions?
Mr. Chair, just if I could, this is going to be your last time testifying before the committee. And I just think of what's happened, in my lifetime to emerging issues, microbeads and personal care products, hormones, superbugs, antibiotics. These are all pollutions that have been added to our waterways that the people who built the infrastructure to treat our water weren't even thinking about. So Mr. Simpson pointed out how tight the budget is around here, but as you look back on what you've worked on, and as you look forward as to some of the challenges the next EPA administrator is going to have, are there areas where regulations have not caught up with what you're facing? And what are some of the emerging issues you would say that we as a committee should be prepared to have to grapple with as we figure out how to improve our drinking water and our water treatment systems?
Big question. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to answer the question and give it the thought that it deserves. But I think what you mentioned in terms of the challenges for drinking water and wastewater treatment technologies are some that keep me up at night, because I just think that we're seeing things and contaminants now where we're not properly protecting our source waters, where we have to look at our discharges into those waters more carefully to understand what's in there, to look at what's getting into our wastewater treatment and what we're not prepared to treat, what those systems have not been designed to effectively get out of before it then gets back into the source water and potentially into our drinking water source. So having that in mind as we're looking at not just upgrading but new technology solutions, we have to stop pretending that we can fix all those and start accommodating them through technology investments and getting those technologies into the market. I think you all know that I've spent a great deal of my time on climate change. I would be, I think, not doing my duty if I didn't continue to raise that. I think in the energy world, you see a lot of opportunity and transition already happening, but we need more solutions on the table, more investment, more understanding of how we take action on climate that's commensurate with the risk. And frankly, part of the challenge that EPA faces is you've given us a lot of opportunity to prevent problems before they arise, but we need more. You need investment if you're going to stop from having to do these emergencies in Flint, the emergency in Toledo. Every time we do that, we spend more time on one incident than infrastructure investment would have had for 3, 4, 5, 6 other facilities. Do you know what I mean? And we have to stop thinking about crisis by crisis and start looking more systemically at these issues, and EPA as well. Needs to do that, working hand in hand with Congress. And I appreciate the opportunity to have been able to work with you for as long as I have. I think you've been a terrific sort of advisor to the work that we're doing. You remind us constantly of how important that work is, and I know you have a difficult job, and I appreciate it very much that you've given it such tremendous attention.
Thank you, and we certainly appreciate your attendance here, and thank you for your service, and we wish you well in the future.
Thank you.
We
Mr.
are
Chairman.
adjourned.